So it's Anne, Diane, Goretti. So Sam, you're after Goretti.
I'm fine in the mornings.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? Okay. I think we'll make a start. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to introduce myself briefly and the panel, and everyone on the panel is going to have a chance to speak, and then there will be questions and observations from the audience afterwards. So I'm Hallgarten. I'm the chair of Voice for Choice, which is the UK coalition to protect and extend abortion rights for women all over the UK. And I've been part of the pro-choice movement since we fought and successfully defeated the Orton Bill. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but it was a long time ago. And Voice for Choice organisations have been key in defeating multiple attacks on abortion rights in the UK Parliament successfully. But what we haven't done is to make progress. So lots of progress has happened at policy level and at clinic level, but at legislative level, we haven't made that progress. And that's why I'm really excited to be here to support this brilliant campaign. It's a campaign that's long overdue. Some people might say 150 years overdue, because abortion was criminalised in 1861, and despite the 1967 Act providing exceptions to that law, which mean that women in most parts of the UK, but Northern Ireland, can access safe and legal abortion. In fact, it still sits within the criminal law, and that's exactly what this campaign is addressing, which is that women still don't have a right to abortion. They can ask for abortion, and doctors have to authorise it, 2 doctors in fact. It feels like public opinion has moved on, and most people are actually really shocked to find that abortion is still a criminal act. And yet actually we've seen in the last few years a sort of increase, it seems, in doctors and women being prosecuted for various offences related to abortion under the 1861 Act. So it seems high time that we address that and that we raise this as an issue for the wider public. So I want to thank you all for being here to be part of this launch and part of this discussion. I'm now going to introduce our lovely panel, it's really nice to have a really wide range of people here, and they're going to speak as soon as we've seen a short film. So we've got, on my far right, Anne Furedi, who's the Chief Executive of bpas. It's a non-profit charity that provides a whole range of reproductive health care services, and Anne's background is in journalism and advocacy, and she's also worked in policy development as Director of Policy and Communications for the regulator of embryo research, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. And she's the author of The Moral Case for Abortion, which is a book that will be published this July by Palgrave Macmillan. So we all look forward to reading that. Right in the middle, we've got Diane Monday, from the Abortion Law Reform Association. That's what I've got you down as. And she joined the Abortion Law Reform Association in 1961 following publicity about the drug thalidomide, which she'd been prescribed during her pregnancy but did not use. And having become pregnant after that, she was incensed to find that she could access a safe abortion by, as she put it, having a checkbook to wave in Harley Street, whereas other women were not able to buy a legal abortion and were dying in the back streets as a result. She was elected to ALRA, to that executive committee, and became its vice chairman. And during the campaigns leading up to the 1967 Abortion Act, she was ALRA's main spokesperson and later general secretary. She was closely involved with setting up the Birmingham Pregnancy Advice Service, which became bpas, as well as fighting off some 16 parliamentary attempts to destroy or restrict the Act. And in 1974, she joined bpas as its public press and parliamentary relations officer and remained in that post until she retired in 1990. And she holds a wealth of knowledge about the history of abortion and campaigning for safe legal abortion in this country. So we're really, really delighted to have her here. Right next to me, I've got Goretti Horgan from Alliance for Choice in Northern Ireland. Goretti has been active in the fight for abortion rights in Ireland since 1980, in the south with the Women's Right to Choose group and the anti-amendment campaign, and then since 1986 in the north, where she's a founder member of Alliance for Choice, and she's an active socialist and lecturer in social policy at Ulster University, where she's the Equality Officer of the University and Colleges Union. And next to her, Sam Smethers, who we're delighted to welcome, who's the Chief Executive of the Fawcett Society. And the Fawcett Society, she was previously one of its trustees for 3 years until 2010. She's worked for both the Equal Opportunities Commission and the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. And prior to this, she was Chief Executive of Grandparents Plus, which champions the role of grandparents in caring within the family. And finally, I've got apologies from Elizabeth Prochaska, who was going to be speaking here and who unfortunately can't make it, but we do have Naomi Philips from the British Humanist Association, who is a feminist and a campaigner for women's rights and for secularism. And Naomi has headed the policy, public affairs and campaigns work of 3 national charities, Breast Cancer Now, Mind and the BHA, and she's a graduate of LSE's Gender Institute. So that's our panel, and without further ado... I think we're going to watch a short film to launch the campaign.
The fight for equality has been long. It has seen setbacks and victories, joy and sacrifice. But those victories and moments of joy have been long-lasting, the setbacks and sacrifice overcome. Which is why every woman watching this video is standing on the shoulders of giants. No matter who we are or what we do, we owe a debt of gratitude to the women who came before us and fought for our way of life. Our mothers, grandmothers, and great-great-grandmothers. And they were great. They fought so that we could vote. They fought so that we could have equal pay for equal work. They fought to make rape in marriage illegal and property laws fair, and to create a world where we could thrive because of our ability, not be held back because of our biology. They taught us that there is no limit to what we can do except the limit we put upon ourselves. Many tried to hold them back. Many still try to hold us back, even though it is against their own interests. Because it is no accident that the more equal a society becomes, the more developed it becomes. The more women who are allowed to advance on merit, the greater the depth of talent that business, science, politics, art, and every other part of society can draw from. When all are equal, we all benefit. So it may shock you to know that under a law passed in 1861, abortion is still illegal in the UK unless 2 doctors decide that the woman's physical or mental health is at risk. Does a more outdated, patriarchal law exist in Britain today than this? Why can't we trust a woman to make decisions about her own body? We have come so far. Changing this ancient law will be a symbol of just how far, a statement of intent that however far there is still to go, we will get there. One day, our own sons and daughters, when we choose to have them, will stand on our shoulders and see further than we have ever seen before. And they will know that when it counted, our generation stood up. Our generation continued the fight, men and women side by side. Our generation, when the time came, did something. That time is today. Help overturn this law. Join the campaign now.
Okay, so we're going to start with Anne. And if I feel you're really going over time, I'm going to wave something in your peripheral vision.
And it'll catch my eye. Thank you very much for turning out tonight for a big meeting to kick off what is going to be a big campaign that I believe has got a really big objective, because I think that this really is the start of a movement to change the abortion law in a completely different way to the way that we've tended to discuss it in the past. I think that what we want to do now is to look at how abortion can be provided in a way that reflects the modern views that we have of how women should control their fertility. And that we should look at what kind of laws and regulations we need in modern society, and we should look at how services need to be provided in a modern society and how they are held back by the laws that are in place at the moment. We've talked about the decriminalisation of abortion, and that's really what this campaign is all about. And the notion of decriminalisation is, to my mind, something that is very simple and very straightforward. It simply means that abortion is taken out of the criminal law and is regulated and has laws simply like every other kind of medical treatment. And that is the kind of laws that are needed to make it safe, to make sure that it's provided in a way that does what it's supposed to do. We need laws that regulate medicine, not regulate who can have abortion treatment. And that is predominantly what the law does at the moment. And we feel that decisions about the future of pregnancy should be made by women themselves and should not be subject to the outdated prejudices of politicians and civil servants and people who run society and think that they should shape the circumstances in which women are able to decide whether they continue or end pregnancies. We know that abortion is a fact of life today. We know that 1 in 3 women will have an abortion at some time during their lifetime. They're us, they're our sisters, they're our mothers, they're our friends, they're our next door neighbours. We all know those women who have abortions. We know that women need abortion in modern society to back up their birth control. And we know that abortion needs to be as accessible as other kinds of birth control. And yet the way that abortion is provided in society at the moment is nothing like the way that other methods of birth control are provided, and nothing like the way that other medical care is provided. Those of us who provide abortions through organisations like mine, like British Pregnancy Advisory Service, that sees almost 70,000 women a year, 60,000 of those who will go on to terminate their pregnancies, we provide services in spite of the way that the law tries to organise things. We have a law that limits who can do abortions, which means that only doctors who are registered medical practitioners can provide the services that we carry out. It excludes midwives, excludes nurses who would be eminently qualified to provide abortion services from carrying out those in a way that women need them. The law says that abortions must take place in a specially licensed clinic, even though for almost 40,000 of the women that we see, the process of abortion is no more complicated than taking 2 sets of medication, yet that must be done in a clinic. The law says that 2 doctors must approve a woman's reasons for deciding on an abortion to make sure that she fits within the law. And the law as it's formed at the moment says that we can help a 13-year-old girl who is perhaps 23 weeks and 4 days pregnant, but we cannot help a 13-year-old girl who is 24 weeks and 1 day pregnant. She must continue her pregnancy to become a mother. So what we'd say at the moment is that the law does not work for women. Society expects us to be equal. It expects us to live lives that are full and that are more than simply being mothers. But it doesn't provide us with the means to decide whether we have children, if we do, when we have children, or with whom we have children. We are not children, and yet the law does not trust us to make decisions for ourselves about whether to have children. And we think that women can be trusted. We think women can be trusted to make good decisions about their fertility. And even when women make decisions that you do not think are good decisions, we believe it is still their decision, it is still our decision as women to make, and no one else's, because we will live the lives that will be most affected by those decisions. BPAS is calling for decriminalisation because we trust women. We're asking you to stand with us and to fight for that decriminalisation of abortion, to allow women to take responsibility for making the decisions about the most intimate and personal decisions of their lives. We're calling on you to support the fight for decriminalisation and to say that politicians should back off out of women's personal lives, because abortion is our backup for the kind of lives that we want to live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And can I ask Diane now to...
I really wouldn't have believed when I first stood on this platform advocating a better deal for women by liberalising Britain's abortion laws that I would be back here 50 years later doing exactly the same thing. And here I am. Neither would I have believed that Britain, which then was in the vanguard for humane reforms, would after half a century be lagging behind most of Catholic Europe and indeed a large chunk of the rest of the world by retaining draconian punishments, imprisonment for life, for women who try to end their own pregnancies, and for doctors who are careless about the pieces of paper they fill in. Back then, in the early 1960s, not only was I 2 stone lighter and had pigment in my hair, but I was living in a Britain that was fast becoming a world leader in replacing outdated and inhumane laws. Laws that at that time were anti-women, anti-sexual activity and contraception outside of marriage, anti-gay people, anti-divorce, and pro-capital punishment. We were replacing those laws with ones that were enlightened, civilized, more humane, and more fit for the times we lived in. True, and I have to confess, the 1967 Abortion Act, which I helped to draft and was instrumental in supporting before it was passed, did not achieve those criteria. And while I rejoiced when it was passed as a move in the right direction and the very best that could be achieved at that time, I was acutely aware all those years ago that by handing control to the medical profession, we were shortchanging women and their autonomy over their own lives and their bodies. But I truly believed it was so anomalous that it was only a matter of time before the unacceptable restrictions within the 67 Act had to be lifted. How wrong I was. But why? All those other liberties fought for and won in that decade have remained with us. None of those freedoms have been constantly sniped at and contested in the way the Abortion Act have. 30 parliamentary attempts over those years. What a waste of time. But many of those freedoms were not only retained, but extended. Now, there's not the time, and neither is this the relevant context, to rehearse the reprehensible reasons for this dichotomy in social reform. But the fact that this is the situation now is important and highly relevant to this long overdue campaign for decriminalisation. Also relevant is the fact that despite a massive majority of the electorate, over 80%, being in favour of the recent bill to legalise assisted dying, the final vote in the House of Commons a few months ago saw only 118 supporters of the move and a massive 330 opposers. And what we are trying to do is in the same category. And that underlines the very tough fight we have on our hands. I'd like to make a small suggestion that could help. As money is a preeminent concern of this government, we should perhaps, in addition to the traditional arguments, the moral arguments that Anne will spell out in her books, we should publicise just how much the unnecessary, totally unnecessary, administrative procedures, again which Anne outlined, laid down by the 67 Abortion Act are costing. And remember, in Canada, where abortion has been decriminalised for nearly 30 years now, no thunderbolt has come down from the sky, and perhaps more importantly, they actually have a lower abortion rate than we do. That puts paid to the argument, I'm sure we will hear from the anti-abortion lobby, that if we decriminalise abortion, women will go around aborting like mad as a form of entertainment. In bpas, it costs £6.10 worth of doctors' time to do the statutory paperwork before each pregnancy is terminated. Extrapolate that to the 184,500 abortions performed in England and Wales each year, and we get a staggering total of nearly £1.25 million. Next month, abortion will have been legal in Britain for 48 years. Multiply that cost by 48 and think, for example, how many extra nurses the cash-strapped NHS could have employed for that sum, which was wasted on unnecessary paperwork. Then we have the statutory inspection of non-NHS premises, which again Anne touched on, which under the terms of the 67 Act must be approved in order to terminate pregnancies legally. We have some figures for this relating to an inspection in 2012 when, following a report in the Daily Telegraph, where else, a snap inspection of the Daily Telegraph reported illegal activity. That illegal activity was that some doctors were pre-signing the consent forms which are necessary before terminating a pregnancy can be agreed. A snap inspection by the Care Quality Commission took up the equivalent of 1,100 days of the Care Commission's time, costing approximately £1 million. Interestingly, the chairman of the CQC actually complained to the government, who had asked for the inspection, that it equated to 580 other inspections being forgone. Just think given what we know of the ill treatment of elderly people, and I have a particular interest in that, being ill-treated in care homes, how much suffering those resources, if used for a good purpose, would have prevented. And finally, let us not forget, again, as Anne said, we seem to think on the same lines, that around 1 in 3 women terminate a problem pregnancy during their fertile years. We must harness that lobbying power. Imagine, over 48 years, if all those women wrote to their MPs. I admit, because a significant success, perhaps the only one, of the anti-abortion lobby has been to make women feel it is not all right to feel all right about having terminated a pregnancy, and making them unwilling to talk, or indeed to even admit to having done so. That is something, and I'm delighted to see so many younger women in this audience tonight, because they have to pick up this campaigning baton. It is something we have to change on. Women should be able to come out and say, I have had an abortion, it was right for me at the time I did it, I am not ashamed of it. And until they do that, we will not get this change. We will not succeed with this campaign, which I'm very proud to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane. I'm delighted to have Goretti as our next speaker.
Okay, hi. So it's actually 20 years this year since Alliance for Choice was set up in Northern Ireland. And when we set it up, it was partly because we were coming up to the 30th anniversary of the Abortion Act being passed here, and we kind of thought, 30 years behind, we should surely be able to, catch up now. And here we are, 50 years behind the rest of the UK. And, we pay the same taxes, and we're supposed to have the same kind of services, but there you go. So here we are in 2016, and a couple of weeks back, the Northern Ireland Assembly refused to pass a law, voted down a change to the abortion law, which would have allowed abortion in the case of fetal abnormalities. Now that means that there would be no chance of life outside of the womb, or at least, no chance beyond a couple of days, or at most a couple of weeks. And yet, even that really tiny reform, our Assembly decided to vote down. And at the same time as they're doing that, there are 2 women on trial in Belfast for using the same abortion pills that you use here on the NHS and that bpas uses for the majority of abortions. It's like about half of all abortions, I think, in England, and 4 out of 5 abortions in Scotland use these same pills that these women have been put on trial. One of them, a mother of a 15-year-old, understandably a mother who wanted to save her daughter, becoming a mother too soon, but also, frankly, we don't know whether the woman had the money to travel to England or not, and she maybe didn't know about the wonderful abortion support network, and so didn't know that she could get help. So she went and she got the pills from the internet for her daughter, clearly panicked at some stage, brought the daughter to a hospital, and next thing you know, she's on trial and facing 5 years in prison. The other woman, who we understand, because we don't know any of these women, these are not activists, these are individual, isolated women. The other woman is, we know, to be a 21-year-old, and she is charged with causing her own abortion using these pills and faces life imprisonment. And that's what the criminalization of abortion means. It's not just that there are all the limitations of the Abortion Act, which, we've heard about and definitely are ridiculous in this day and age, but also what it means is that if a woman, for whatever reason, doesn't either can't, like because she's in Northern Ireland, can't access abortion through the health service, or if she's here and for whatever reason, because of mental ill health or because she's being abused or whatever reason, she decides she's going to try to cause an abortion for herself by whatever means, they're facing life imprisonment. That is actually the reality still for women. And like in Northern Ireland, things have actually gone backwards. Things have gone backwards so much since devolution that actually it's frightening. I mean, in the year 2000, there were about around every year there'd be 120, 140 abortions carried out in Northern Ireland, mainly for reasons of fetal abnormality, not fatal fetal abnormality, just general fetal abnormality, but obviously also when a woman's mental or physical health was severely at risk. And essentially, we operate under the same laws you had here before 1967, when, as Diane knows, if you have the money, you can always get the abortion. And certainly, if you had a very, hard case, like I say, you would have been able to get access to abortion. The last year that we have figures for how many abortions are being carried out in Northern Ireland now is 2014. In 2014, there were 14 abortions carried out in Northern Ireland. That means that the only women who were getting abortions were those whose lives really were at risk. And that's the situation that women face in Northern Ireland. Now, the thing is that doesn't represent public opinion. Our politicians tell us that it represents public opinion, and the anti-abortion people will tell you that they represent public opinion. But actually, when the BBC did a poll before Christmas, just before Christmas, they found that only 20% of the population of Northern Ireland thought that the abortion law should remain as it is, that abortion should remain unavailable. The vast majority thought that abortion should be available under some circumstances. So some of the things that are seen as like the hard circumstances, like if a woman is pregnant as a result of rape or sexual violence, but actually a very large proportion saying that it should be available if a woman's health, physical or mental, is in danger. So very much actually the kind of provisions of the 1967 Act. Not only is it the case that public opinion doesn't agree with the way that the abortion law is in Northern Ireland, but it's also the case that women are starting to speak out about having had abortion. So more and more women are coming forward and saying, yes, I had an abortion. In fact, we've had 2 now open letters. The first one in around International Women's Day 2013, when over 100 women signed a letter saying that either they had taken abortion pills illegally and to cause their own miscarriage, or they had helped somebody else to get it. And more recently, as soon as the word came through about the first prosecution, over 200 women and some men signed a letter to say, we too have done this. We too have either used those abortion pills or have procured them. And again, lots of women, The Guardian ran a little bit of a campaign there at the start of the year about the position in Northern Ireland, and lots of women came forward to give their stories on film and on sort of soundscapes about their abortion stories. Even High Court judges are starting to say that the position in Northern Ireland is ridiculous. So before Christmas, the Human Rights Commission, Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, took a case looking to have it declared that it was against women's human rights that abortion isn't available in the case of fatal fetal abnormalities and when she's pregnant as a result of rape. And Judge Horner, in his judgment on that, when he said, yes, that's right, it's not compatible with women's rights, with human rights, and that these abortions should not be available. But he went on to say in some detail that actually the law in Northern Ireland makes no sense at all when, if a woman has the money, she can get on a plane and go to England and get a legal abortion quite easily. And he said, this actually suggests, this says to me that this law smacks of one law for the rich and another for the poor. And when a High Court judge is saying things like that, then, it really says something about what is going on. And of course, it is true that if you have money, if you have a credit card that's not maxed out or whatever, it's very easy to get an abortion in Northern Ireland. And the problem is that if you have no money, and if you don't know how to get in touch with the Abortion Support Network, or you haven't heard of them, then really the only choice that you have is to have an illegal abortion, a safe abortion using these very safe pills, but nonetheless an illegal abortion, and face prosecution, a risk prosecution, or continue the pregnancy. Now, Westminster will say, when we complain about this, and we say it's clear our Assembly is not going to move, if they're not going to allow abortion, when really it's not an abortion practically, because there is no hope of life at the end of the pregnancy, if they're not even going to allow abortion in those kind of circumstances, then what hope is there that they'll actually do something for the, about 2,000 women a year, who either come to England or who take the abortion pills? And Westminster, when we say, look, you have to do something about this, Westminster has to act. They say it's nothing to do with us. We've devolved it. It's devolved now. Well, actually, welfare reform is a devolved issue. Welfare reform was devolved. And when our Assembly said, we're not going to legislate for welfare reform, what did Westminster say? They said, well, if you don't do it, we will. Well, I think if it's good enough to say to women, we are going to take benefits from you, we are going to say that if you have so many children, you won't even be able to get child benefit for them, and at the same time, neither can you choose not to go ahead with a pregnancy if you've already got more children than they're willing to give you benefits for, because in Northern Ireland it's about, the benefit cap is about the number of kids you have, not about housing costs. And so if they can do that, why can't they legislate to bring the same kind of abortion rights to Northern Ireland as you have here? And actually, it's also the case that the British government, through DFID, through the Department for International Development, lectures other countries about why they should why they think that abortion is a human right, and why women should not be criminalised if they're in a country, if they have an abortion in a country where abortion is still illegal. And just last week, the UK is part of international treaties and a whole number of international treaties, like the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but also one which issued last week a general comment. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's the most exciting thing that I've seen for a while. I'm not saying that these UN committees, are going to change the world, right? Of course I'm not saying that, but they give good ammunition that we can use. And on the 4th of March, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights issued a special general comment. Now, actually, these general comments are usually when they think that an area has not been given enough attention. And they issued a specific comment on sexual and reproductive health, where they said, in paragraph 28, that the Convention, quote, requires states to liberalise restrictive abortion laws, guarantee women and girls access to safe abortion services and quality post-abortion providers, and respects women's rights to make autonomous decisions about their sexual and reproductive health. In paragraph 34, they said, a wide range of laws, policies and practices undermine the autonomy and right to equality and non-discrimination of the full enjoyment of the right to sexual and reproductive health. For example, the criminalization of abortion or restrictive abortion laws. State parties should also ensure equal access to the full range of sexual and reproductive health information, goods and services. So that is actually, that's the latest one. The CEDAW committee has said this time and time again to the British government, and they've done absolutely nothing about it. So whenever your MP says, when you raise Northern Ireland to your MP and they say, no, can't do anything about it, nothing to do with us, you say, actually it is, because the UK is the state party that is responsible for all these human rights treaties that they're ignoring at the moment. And just to finish, because do you want to finish? Why should we be fighting for decriminalisation today? Now, first of all, if you want to see change in Northern Ireland, then decriminalisation here and across the UK could actually make a huge difference to women in Northern Ireland, because it could actually open the door a bit. And of course, decriminalisation doesn't mean automatic access. There's parts of Canada, for example, where there's very, very poor access. But what it would allow is for doctors to actually, for example, the kind of view that we have in Northern Ireland overwhelmingly is that actually the abortion pill, which is already well used by women there, illegally, but nonetheless, that our GPs could take over prescribing that and actually providing it to women. Maybe it could be available over the counter like the morning after pill. Well, that would be my personal favourite. But the point is that decriminalisation across the UK could have a huge impact on Northern Ireland, which otherwise may not happen. So I guess I'm saying, please endorse this campaign, please get active, and please make sure that Northern Ireland women are to the fore all the time, because 50 years on after the Abortion Act was brought through the Parliament, it is ridiculous that we're still waiting to get legal abortion there.
Now could I ask Sam Smethers from the Fawcett Society?
Good evening, everyone. I hope my voice holds out. I've got a bit of a bad throat, which is why I disappeared off, but I'll do my best to carry on. I just want to say how welcome it is to see this campaign launched by bpas. I think it's really positive to have a positive campaign on abortion and not a defensive campaign that's reacting against attempts to shrink the time limit and so on. So I really credit bpas for this, and it's really, I very much stand here welcoming it and on Fawcett's behalf, and we're fully behind it. I want to think about the wider context for abortion legislation, why we have the abortion law we do. And I think the film set out a little bit of one or two of the things I want to say. At Fawcett, we're celebrating 150 years of the organisation. We trace our origins back to the first petition that Minister Fawcett collected signatures on back in 1866. And actually, a lot of the rights that she was fighting for were about the kind of social change, the rights of women to education, the rights of women to have property in their own right and not to belong to a man. In 1866, a woman didn't exist in her own right. She belonged to a man. Her children and everything she owned belonged to her husband. She didn't have any rights over that property herself, and nor does she have any rights over her own body herself. So everything that we see now in our abortion legislation is actually grounded in Victorian-style patriarchy. It is still writ large. The patriarchy is still with us in 21st century Britain. And that is what is governing the way we treat women's bodies and the way we treat women's control over their bodies in our abortion legislation. And it's a real hangover from the past that doesn't belong in 21st century Britain. I think it's really important to also think about the way we view women in terms of the choices they make about motherhood generally. Motherhood is a very political issue. So if a woman chooses to terminate a pregnancy, that is a highly charged act. It's not something that she can freely make without judgment. If she walks into an abortion clinic, there could be people protesting outside, trying to impede her access to that service and making her feel ashamed of the choice she's made, as Diane and others have mentioned. If she goes on to have too many children, she's judged by the benefit system. So you're not allowed to have too many children if you're dependent on the benefit system. We're going to tell you how many children you're allowed to have. If she has them too late, she's told, actually, no, your best years of fertility are behind you. You've waited too long to have your children. If she mislays a partner and she does it on her own as a single parent, then she's also judged for that act as well. So this is all about, truly, it's all about control and power and control over women's bodies and restricting their free choice. And I think I just wanted to come back to the issue of women in Northern Ireland, because I think it's to our eternal shame that women in Northern Ireland are treated so differently to women in the rest of the United Kingdom. I think it is absolute outrage that those women have been left without access to abortion in part of the United Kingdom. Last year, 5,000 women travelled to have abortions in England. So there were non-resident women who were having abortions here. And again, it comes back to some very fundamental things. This is about their fundamental human rights. This is about their ability to exercise their fundamental human rights, which are being denied them on UK soil. And we've allowed that to persist. And it's no criticism of campaigners or the agenda at all, but I think it's a sign of where the debate has stopped. It's like arrested development, if you like, in terms of thinking. The debate has stopped almost because, you know, perhaps we've been too busy defending what we've got rather than taking the fight to others, which is, again, is why this campaign is so important. It is about having that positive fight, and it's perfectly reasonable to say it should be for women to make that choice. It's absolutely what women in other parts of Europe get. There's no controversy about that in other parts of the world. It really is where we should belong, and it's where we all expect to be. So the news that we're committing a criminal offence by accessing abortion, it's extraordinary, but it's true, and that's where we've left our legislation. We've left it behind, and the rest of society has far, far moved on from our legislators and our politics. And I think the comparison with assisted dying is a very good one, in that you've got the public opinion so far removed from what politicians are prepared to do in Parliament. And I think this is another issue where, you know, women's opinion, public opinion has so completely shifted. I just wanted to say a little bit more about Northern Ireland, because I thought the judge's remarks were really significant. Because he said, there can be no doubt that the law has made it much more difficult for those with limited means to travel to England. They are the ones who are more likely to be greatly affected in their ability to terminate their pregnancy if they cannot obtain charitable assistance. The protection of morals should not contemplate a restriction that bites on the impoverished but not the wealthy. That smacks of one law for the rich and one law for the poor. And that is exactly where we came in 1967. That's exactly why the legislation was needed, because there were women who could buy access to an abortion in Harley Street, as we've heard, and other women couldn't gain access to it. And I think, again, it's all about power and control. Women with money will always have more choices than women without. So it's for our legislation to address that, to remove those barriers, and to treat women the same based on their need and the choices that they're making, not based on their wherewithal to buy a flight to the UK, to England to have an abortion. So we see it as about fundamental rights for women. This is one of the things that, after 150 years of Fawcett's campaigning on women's rights, it's a bit of a hangover that needs to be addressed. And absolutely, we need to see this change. So Fawcett's fully behind bpas for this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think a special applause to the Fawcett Society for 150 years of really, really important campaigning. So thank you, Fawcett Society, for all that you've done and are going on to do. We've now got Naomi Philips, and I'd like you to speak for a few minutes.
Yes. I'll be pretty quick, I think. Just say I'm really, really pleased to be here, representing the British Humanist Association, for which I used to work, but I'm now a trustee. And we absolutely support this campaign. We're long-standing supporters of women's right to choose, and really delighted to actually have quite a long-standing relationship with bpas in terms of sort of policy and campaigning as well, where we really have worked together in the past, and we're really delighted to work with bpas on this really, really important campaign. For those of you who don't know, the British Humanist Association is the national charity working on behalf of non-religious people who seek to live ethical and fulfilling lives on the basis of reason and humanity. And in terms of campaigning, we campaign for secularism, separation of church and state, which I'll speak a bit more about, and for human rights and for individual freedoms. And it's the BHA's position that women should have the choice to access safe, legal and free abortion, should they want one. And we campaign for the extension and further liberalisation of abortion laws, which is why we're very keen to support this particular campaign. And we campaign both in the UK and Europe and internationally as well. Humanists support this We Trust Women campaign because it's time to stop criminalising women for what is their fundamental right. And also it's important to set a benchmark to work towards for women globally as well. The anachronistic law in the UK, as we've heard, fails to recognise changing societal attitudes, which are generally pro-choice, and denies women the status of competent and conscientious decision makers. If abortion is kept in the criminal code, a clear message is sent that women who go ahead with abortions may be criminals just because they feel they cannot or don't want to proceed with a pregnancy for whatever reason. And we're also sending a message that women can't be trusted to make effective decisions about their own lives and about their futures. And we are faced with a situation globally where abortion rights are under threat or have already been rolled back. Very well-resourced religious lobbying and campaign groups, from the very small to the International Catholic Church, are working day in and day out to restrict a women's right to choose. And this particular angle around the religious lobby is something I wanted to pick up in particular. The debate around abortion in the UK is often polarised and ill-informed, with very vocal and strongly anti-choice Christian groups in particular seeking to change the law and take away women's right to access safe abortion. And I think the first thing to say is that those views, which while very loud, aren't representative. And in fact, surveys often show that there's large agreement in the population towards social, ethical and medical issues such as abortion, regardless of whether somebody is religious or not, with majorities supporting more progressive and liberal perspectives. That notwithstanding, it is religious groups which are the best funded and organised to do the lobbying against abortion, and they do that themselves, and they also do that through advocates in Parliament, which may be one reason why Parliament seems to be so out of step with public and women's opinions. And I think that much of that kind of lobbying actually isn't very honest and open. So you'll see those kind of groups often not mention their kind of religious inspiration, but say that they care about, for example, the human rights of fetuses, which don't exist, but the human rights of women, that they're concerned about women, or they might use supposedly scientific arguments and reasoning to make a rational case to try to restrict or outlaw abortion, or to keep abortion within the criminal law. They can use the language of rights or spread untrue information about abortion, might do that through schools or through counselling or through parliamentary briefings. And sometimes it's actually really hard to find out that they are in fact religiously motivated, and it's totally dishonest. I think it would probably be much better for them to say, as some quite openly do, that their religious beliefs are against abortion, and rather than let women choose for themselves, they wish to impose their religious beliefs on everyone else and take away that choice. At least then people will be able to make a proper assessment of whether they wish to support those perspectives or not. And those dishonest tactics by a well-funded religious lobby do cloud the arena and make it seem as if there may be credible or legitimate, rational arguments for forcing women to carry unwanted or dangerous pregnancies, or those which are not viable to term, and to keep abortion as a criminal offence. And I don't think there are any credible or legitimate arguments to do that. And I think that we need to work together to expose the dishonest tactics of anti-choice lobbyists and to keep making the case for a more liberal and women's rights-centred approach to abortion across the UK and internationally. Thank you.
I want to thank the panel. I think we've had some really nice, interesting sort of range of perspectives about the same issue. And just to pick up on a couple of bits, I think the really brilliant that you brought up the aspect of the religious views. And one of the things that I spent a lot of time working on was education around abortion in schools and trying to get people to pull apart the emotional and subjective arguments about abortion, which people have a legitimate right to talk about and discuss and feel, and the factual evidence-based arguments. And I think people being really honest about where they're coming from, whether they are absolutely against abortion on moral reasons, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of a woman's health, regardless of a woman's autonomy, rather than trying to frame it in quasi-science, is a really important point that you raised, and that one will be aware of in this room as this debate opens up today. We, Voice for Choice, were lucky enough a couple of weeks ago to host a very intimate discussion with Gloria Steinem, who people will know as the legendary US feminist. And she framed this in a way that I thought was really simple and really unarguable, and that is, the government ends where my skin begins. And I thought that was a really nice framing of the idea of women's autonomy, and again, something that I think we've very much got in our minds when we're thinking about decriminalisation. So I am going to open up the floor. We've got people going around with mics, and we're going to take 2 or 3 comments at a time. It'd be really great if you're representing an organisation, do say who you are. try and keep things brief so that we can include as many people in the debate as possible. And then when we've got your three comments or observations or questions, I'll put it to the panel and we'll decide who feels most moved to answer to it. So is there anyone who wants to say anything? Somebody right there, Abby.
Hi, I'm Ella Whelan from Spiked Online. I completely agree with everything that's been said, and it's a fantastic campaign. While I would disagree with the comparisons drawn with assisted dying, I think that actually right now is a really great and important time to be talking about this, because women's freedom around their bodies is so much in public discussion, and you can draw links with the campaign to decriminalise abortion, with the campaign to decriminalise prostitution, and campaigns to stop pressurisation around women who are breastfeeding. It's kind of a very uncontroversial idea that women should have freedom over their own bodies, and yet, as has been said, this is a discussion that is shrouded in so much freak out, panic and controversy. So I really think if we draw on these kind of collective ideas that they're absolutely that the state should not be at all involved in a woman's decision over her own body, using these kind of the same ideas with prostitution, breastfeeding and abortion, it's an important time to kind of make this case.
Thank you. Somebody over here and somebody at the front.
Hi, Eleanor Gillies, thank you so much for these wonderful talks. Quite simply, how can we help?
Hi there, I'm Eve. Your campaign for decriminalisation means that you want to remove abortion from the criminal law altogether. This would mean getting rid of any upper limit on abortion in terms of weeks, and it would mean allowing any grounds for having abortion. In other words, having abortion up to birth for any reason. Is this really what you want?
Okay, so I might... Oh, okay, we'll take one more.
Mine follows on from what the lady at the front just said. My name's Jen. I'm a medical law and ethics postgrad at King's College. So I am in complete agreement with the panel that the criminal law is not the appropriate regulatory mechanism for abortion. I'd like to know whether you have a different regulatory framework in mind, or any ideas about what sort of system or whatever you would like to propose, or if you have a proposal for a system that would be better.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that I give Anne the question about the upper limit and what happens when you remove abortion from the criminal law. I know she knows a lot about what's happened in Canada around that, and maybe we can then talk about different regulatory frameworks. And I might throw open the earlier questions to other members of the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to be very, very clear and blunt about this, so there's absolutely no misunderstanding about it. My own personal view, and a view that we've discussed within this campaign, is that there should be absolutely no grounds for abortion whatsoever. Women should not have to justify why they want to terminate a pregnancy. It should be their decision. And there should be no legal upper limit. That is what taking it out of the criminal law means. And I think this is one of the reasons why we've tagged this around the notion of trusting women to decide. Because if you look at the experience, I think, that we have of other countries where there has been no time limit, you do not find that women are wantonly choosing to end pregnancies days, weeks before birth. Why on earth would they? You know, in Scotland, we don't even have to go to Canada. In Scotland did not have an upper time limit on abortion until it was introduced in 1990. Right? There was no time limit in Scotland because of a kind of quirk in the way that the law worked. Do any of you in this room think that Scottish women were terminating abortions later than they were in England? You know, come on, put up your hands if you think that no legal time limit, women in Scotland were terminating their pregnancies at a later stage than women in the rest of Britain or the rest of the UK. Anybody really believe that? Well, nobody is putting up their hands. Maybe one of the reasons why you think that they weren't terminating them later is possibly two reasons. One is, why would a woman want to? You know, women do not request abortion typically very late in pregnancy for a whole number of reasons. One is that when the pregnancy is unwanted, she generally wants to terminate the pregnancy as early as possible. And women's sense of what it is to be pregnant does also change. You know, ending a pregnancy when you can feel fetal movement and when you're visibly pregnant, it's a very difficult decision for a woman to take. So why would you imagine that a woman would take that decision casually? They simply just don't. And another reason is, do we honestly think that doctors would be wantonly compliant in women making casual decisions? Because no, they don't want to be involved in it either. So the point really, when we say that these things can be taken out of the law, is simply to say that the people who, you know, it's not only politicians and people who frame laws who have views about these things, we do ourselves. And I think that we can trust women and doctors to make decisions about abortion without there being time limits. What I would genuinely like to see is, I would like to see some flexibility introduced. You know, I can tell you that we did see a very young girl at BPAS recently who was 23 weeks and 4 days pregnant. And all I can say is that I was desperately thankful that she managed to find her way, or her parents actually, through her grandparents, managed to find their way to a BPAS clinic, to be treated within those 3 days in which there was a window of opportunity. Because had she been 4 days later, right, not very much would have changed about the status of the fetus, but absolutely everything would have changed about that young girl's future. So what I'm saying is, when you think about what this means, think about it in reality, and the reality of women's lives and yourselves and what you know, rather than in glib comments about the idea of women having abortions at 38 weeks wantonly because there's no good reason for it, because it doesn't happen, and women do not need to be controlled by politicians. In relation, just briefly, on the framework of regulatory practice, do you know, say like you go to a psychiatrist for treatment, and the psychiatrist is thinking about, you know, the best way of treating your mental health, right? They do so on the basis of what's safe, and what's appropriate, what they're qualified for, what they can provide. You go for an operation. When I went to have my bunions operated on, there were a whole gamut of regulations that meant who could do it, where they could do it, what have you. There's no law that specifically defines when a doctor can provide a bunion operation for a woman. There's no law that basically says when you can prescribe antidepressants. There's no law that says when you can do a lobotomy. You know, there's a whole gamut of medical regulations and laws, and abortion properly deserves to be defined as a clinical operation that is carried out on a woman, and it should be regarded as a clinical operation. And we need circumstances that might regulate how it's provided as a part of medical practice. We need no regulations and no laws that determine when it can be provided. That's for women, and it's for doctors.
And I'd like to throw open the question about whether the kind of campaigns around decriminalisation of sex work, the campaigns around whether women should or shouldn't be pressured to breastfeed, whether they are part of a sort of groundswell of caring about women's autonomy and women's bodies and separating them from government, and whether you think that's something that fits with this and that we can somehow capitalise on that. Is that something you'd like to talk about, Sam, at all?
Yeah, very happy to. On breastfeeding, I mean, having had 4 kids myself, I certainly wouldn't want to feel under pressure to do it, and I certainly wouldn't want to feel inhibited from doing it either. So I think it's very much a mother's decision about that and what she chooses to do. On prostitution, we're part of the End Demand campaign, so we believe the selling of sex should be decriminalised, but we would criminalise the purchase of sex, and we would also sign up to women working in the sex trade being able to exit that industry if at all possible, because we see it as a form of violence against women. So that's the position we have on that one.
Does anyone else have any further sort of observations about hooking into other movements around autonomy and bodily autonomy and people making their decisions?
Well, actually, in the south of Ireland, because of the Eighth Amendment, which sort of says that a woman's life is only equal to that of what's known as the unborn, meaning anything from an egg that has a fertilized egg that has been planted onwards. Women can be forced to have cesarean sections when they actually very much don't want to. So the whole question of autonomy, I think, absolutely is linked into it. And actually, personally, I would say that sex workers have their right to autonomy as well. And the same with trans women. There's a whole lot of issues about whether our bodies are our own or whether somebody else should be able to tell us what to do with them. And I think that it's, the idea of decriminalising anything when somebody's deciding something to do with their own body is pretty, I would support it.
One of the, I think that a couple of the speakers have mentioned in terms of a comparison between this and around assisted dying, and I think actually that is a pretty fair comparison, because I think what we're talking about is autonomy and trusting people to make their own decisions about their own lives and their own bodies, and I think that is a fair one. And sort of going on from what I was saying around kind of religious lobbying, actually it's a similar kind of lobby. Actually quite a lot of the same people are involved in opposing any liberalisation of the law or having a more moral law around assisted dying as well. And I think it was the Church of England kind of recently put out a kind of press release in the latest round of kind of trying to oppose any liberalisation of the law around assisted dying. And it was really interesting because it's the same kind of thing I was talking about in terms of the language, where they had always spoken about the sanctity of life and been quite open about, and it's the Church of England being quite open about their position and talking about sanctity of life and the religious kind of perspective, actually didn't mention anything like this at all, talking about a coalition, talking about disability rights and talking about coercion and talking about those kind of things, and actually really masking a lot of what this kind of coalition of religious groups led by the Church of England actually really felt about it. And I think so I think there are kind of comparisons, but I think the idea about autonomy is the really, really important one. And I think we need to trust people more to take control over their own lives and their own bodies.
Diane, did you want to comment on that?
No, I raised the question of the assisted dying law because that is to do with autonomy and raises the same arguments from the same people, because, to put it at its basic level, it is seen as the taking of life, which is not the role of human beings, but belongs to some external agency. And I actually said this is not the place or to discuss why the two are similar, why a parliament that is liberal on many other things has stood. But Naomi is quite right. It is basically the religious lobby with their belief that the sanctity of life, as they call it, though most of them are in favour of capital punishment, which I've always found rather difficult to understand, but that is the similarity between those campaigns and why I believe it has taken so long to get Parliament to do anything about it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pick up on the question of how we can help, and I think there's lots of different ways that people can help with this campaign. I'm sure people from BPAS who've launched this campaign will chip in. And you can certainly talk to the people at the table at the back of the room as you're leaving today and buy some of the fantastic promotional gear, like the nice tote bags. But I think one of the most important things people can do is talk about it, because when you talk about it, people are shocked to find that abortion's still in the criminal law. And I think that's the first step to changing it, is to raise awareness of that. And I think talking about it in your workplace and getting your organisation to sign up to this campaign would be brilliant. But actually talking about it around the dinner table and talking about it with your friends at the pub and wherever you are talking about it, just to raise awareness of the fact that it is in the criminal law, and that although services have come on and policy has made it very accessible for most women to have an abortion, actually there are people who are criminalised and are being prosecuted as a result of abortion still being in the criminal law. So I think it's about making that conversation and drawing in people who don't necessarily see themselves as abortion advocates, but all know people who've had abortions and would be horrified to think that they may have been on the edge of something which was criminal, when actually they were making really valid and important, responsible decisions about how to live their lives. So I think having that conversation is really good. And we know that we don't think that this particular government in this particular parliament is going to act on this, but creating a stir with your MPs and getting your MPs to understand that this is something you're concerned about, and developing a groundswell of feeling around the fact that this is unjust and totally anachronistic, I think is really important. I think those are just some of the ways that you can help, but I'm sure people from BPAS will have things to add. But could we have some more observations and questions from the audience? There's a couple of people there.
Hello, it's Kelly Temple from Abortion Rights. So the speeches, I think, were excellent from the panel, but one of the things I just wanted to ask the panel about what your thoughts are in relation to the 67 Act. One of the things that, when there's been discussions around this that's been raised before, is one of the positives of the 67 Act is that in some ways it has guaranteed access for women that might not exist in other countries where the legislation is different. And so in light of that, with the context of decriminalising abortion, removing it from criminal law, which is obviously the right thing to do, what does the panel think about what ways in doing that can access still be put at the heart and ensured for women who need abortions?
There are a couple of more other people. There's somebody right there.
Hi, Anne, you said in response to one of the earlier questions that women don't usually have an abortion very later on in pregnancy, but you'd still like there to be no restriction. So my question is just why not? Because you said, they might feel the fetus moving around later on. So perhaps do you think that there's something wrong with it later on? Why not have some sort of later restriction? And secondly, if you want no restriction altogether, so a woman can have an abortion for any reason, what if it's gender selective, so she's having an abortion simply because it's a girl or a boy? And if so, what does that say about the status of women? Thank you.
And one other question? One other question before we...
Hi, yes. I just want to say I really, really like the name of this campaign. And I think it's kind of, although there's a lot of consensus in this audience that it's a very, very important campaign, which it is, I think it is a really good name in the context that we're living, where actually there's a real breakdown in the trust of people and of individuals to make autonomous decisions about their lives. And I think, in a way, that's one of the reasons why some of these questions that are coming up about, well, shouldn't there be any kind of limit, reflects that general ambience around us where we don't trust individuals to make decisions about their lives, even when those decisions can be extremely difficult for individuals to arrive at. It's almost like we think about everyone else as the other. So if you were faced with an individual, with a decision that is really hard about, for example, having a late abortion, there's no way you, if you think of yourself, about yourself, there's no way you yourself would make that decision easily. you wouldn't be trivial about it. You wouldn't say, well, I want to go partying more, therefore I'm going to have an abortion. It would be, for you, it would be a life decision. It would be a decision about how you're going to live your life, and you would feel it very, very deeply. And I think that what We Trust Women campaign really represents is the idea that we see others through our own eyes. We recognize that people are more like us than different to us, and that if we wouldn't make that kind of decision lightly, then it is very unlikely that anybody else would make that decision lightly. And I think that idea of trusting people because we see ourselves in them is something that is embedded in this title. The title of this campaign is why I think the campaign is so brilliant.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more.
There seems to be a suggestion that women can't make wrong decisions. I think men can make wrong decisions, and I think women can as well. So I'm not very happy about this sense of prioritising, this sense of choice. And the other thing that I have to say, I'm probably known to some of you. My name's Josephine Quintavalle, and I've been in the pro-life movement for many years. But the story of the termination of the life of a baby at 23 weeks and 4 days, I'm afraid what I was asking myself, was it a boy or a girl?
Okay, I think we'll take a selection of those. I must say, I think it's really nice that we've got a mixture of opinions in the room. I think this is the perfect place to have these debates, and I think you'll all agree it's much better than having them outside abortion clinics. So we are welcoming a range of different opinions, and I think the panel will relish answering some of those questions. So I think that one of the questions that came up is, if women don't want to have late abortions, what's the problem with having restrictions on them? And that was also connected with, if there are no restrictions on the grounds for abortion, does that mean that women could have abortions for on grounds of gender selection? And if so, what does that say about the status of women? I don't know who would like to start on that. Anne would love to start on that.
Incidentally, I have to say, I really loved the comment that was just made about the whole thing about trusting women being about seeing people through our own eyes, because I hadn't actually thought of that, but I think it's a really, really good way of summing it up. And this point about gestational restrictions, you see, the point really that I was trying to illustrate before was that they are completely arbitrary and very fixed and very final, and they don't take into account the circumstances of women's lives. And I think that that is what we need to take into account when we're considering abortion, because the reason why any woman presents and requests an abortion is because of particular circumstances that are going on in her life, and whether it's the right thing for her. And I think that that's really what has to be looked at. So for me, the idea of a time limit at 20 weeks or 24 weeks or 26 weeks or 12 weeks doesn't really seem to make any sense in the abstract. I think that probably what any caring medical team would want to do is to be talking to a woman about, you know, what an abortion means for her at that time, and why it's necessary, and so on, and working that out. And I think that that's by and large what happens, except when the law comes in with a total sledgehammer and says you can't do it. And the point that people who work at bpas make all the time is that the hardest part of their job, the absolute hardest part of their job, is saying to a woman who has come to a clinic thinking that she's earlier in her pregnancy, no, we can't help you because you are beyond that particular time limit, and then having to refer her back to a GP and to go into antenatal care, because the way it was described to me by one of my colleagues is because nothing about that woman's life is any different to the way that she thought it was when her pregnancy was that bit earlier on. And I think that this is the problem, is that we think about it in terms of weeks and days and so on, but for the woman, she's got an incredible mess that needs to be sorted out. And I think the reason why women don't generally have abortions later on is because, you know, usually there is time to get a lot of this thing sorted out. And I think that women do have actually, generally, a kind of reverence and a sort of respect, a sort of sense of there being something about growing life, because they don't not understand what's going on in them. Of course they do. But then there are reasons, and I think that those reasons should be assessed and really down to her and the doctors who, you know, also have a role. They have consciences too. And I think that that's really the way that I would see it. No, Josephine, I'm not saying that all women's decisions are right decisions. You know, women request abortions for all kinds of reasons that I personally might think are not good reasons. But at the end of the day, it's their decision, I think, and it's their choice. So whatever it is, I think that they should be able to make that decision for them because they will live with the consequences. And I might think that it is utterly wrong for a woman to want to abort a pregnancy for any particular reason. But my own view is that it should be down to her. Now, the rider that I'll put on that is that obviously we operate in a society that does not allow women that freedom. And so consequently, within BPAS, as we run, you know, we utterly comply with the law. But for, you know, my sense of what the kind of law that I would like to have would be one that basically said it's simply a matter for a woman to decide if she has a child, when she has a child, with whom she has a child, and in what circumstances she has a child, because that's her life. It's not my life. I'll walk away from the clinic at the end of the day. It's not a politician's life. They will probably know nothing about it, but it is her life.
I think it was very interesting that the lady who made the comment started off by saying sometimes women make wrong decisions. I suspect she, has a very clear idea of what is a wrong decision. But it does seem to me, if we're talking about autonomy, part of autonomy is having the right to make the wrong decision. You cannot have partial autonomy. I suspect that, again, the asker of the question believes there are outside rules which determine for her when it is right and when it is wrong to have an abortion. I think she was probably, and I'm sure she'll correct me if I'm wrong, hinting at the fact that she probably believes that many women regret having abortions, but that is what freedom of choice and autonomy is about. You can't differentiate autonomy.
I just wanted to say a little bit about when women have late-term abortions, and one of the groups that's like the largest group proportionately are actually women who come from Ireland, and they come precisely because there are dreadful restrictions, and they end up, I think the women from Ireland are 3.2 times more likely to have an abortion after 20 weeks than would be the norm for women who can access abortion easily here. So, you know, it seems as if everywhere in the world, the fewer restrictions that there are, the fewer late abortions, later abortions that there are. But I also wanted to respond to the question about, I think from Kelly, about ensuring access in a decriminalised situation. And I think that it's clear that we would need to have, you know, very clear care pathways, especially in places where there may be doctors who are trying to put restrictions on women's in the way of women. But there's absolutely no reason why that can't be done. And I'm quite sure that it probably happens in relation to other things as well. I don't know, like vasectomies or maybe gender transition stuff, those kind of things. So it's just a matter, I think, of like making sure that the NHS, because the other thing is that like it's the case, as I understand it now in the UK, that 98% of abortions are NHS abortions, and that's a really excellent a kind of record, and if we want to make sure that that continues to be the case in a decriminalised situation, then it will be up to the NHS to sort out those regulations to ensure that happens.
Can I just add to that, because I'm really a bit puzzled by the question, because I cannot see in any way how the 1967 Abortion Act has guaranteed access in any way. The 1967 Abortion Act starts off by saying that abortion is illegal unless a woman meets certain criteria, unless two doctors actually agree that a woman meets certain criteria, and then it specifies the places in which abortions can be carried out and who can do them. But it in absolutely no way does it guarantee or give any way. So I'd be really grateful if someone could explain to me, perhaps from abortion rights you might want to do that, how it is that you think that the current law at the moment does anything to guarantee access.
I don't know if anyone else wanted to pick up on the point about sex selection, but I think that's important that we address that, because we discovered through the debate that was had early last year that actually it's a bit of a red herring in this country, because there's not really evidence to suggest that it is a problem. There are parts of the world where it is a problem, but I think it's a mistake to think that having gender selection abortion debases the status of women. It is actually the other way around. It is the debased status of women which causes women to opt for sex-selective abortion. And I think building up, the sort of regeneration of the feminist movement and various aspects of thinking about making women more empowered in their lives and giving women more equality and trying to tackle the things that women fear for their daughters, if they're going to have daughters, tackling the things that will restrict them in their lives or will even endanger them in childhood are the ways that we actually are going to tackle problems around the status of women, and not by restricting abortion. We know that when you restrict abortion, you're actually impeding the status of women and their access to equality and their access to participation in society. So I think it's sort of important to put that one to bed a little bit. Do we have, I don't know if anyone from abortion rights wanted to respond about access. Okay, but there are some other, I'm sure there were some other hands going up.
Hi, Judith Orr, also from Abortion Rights, but I wanted to come back on the sex selection thing because I so agree with Lisa, because I think what some of because there's a popular general mood of supporting legal abortion in Britain, the anti-abortionists have to be, they use language sometimes and arguments that sound progressive, sometimes feminist, in order to try and put a thin edge to try and attack abortion rights in different ways. And I think the so-called sex selection argument was one of those, and it was this argument, well, if it's so-called girl babies, and it was always talking about babies who were being aborted because they weren't wanted. Well, number one, this was found out to be absolutely not the case. It was a myth that this was happening in Britain in terms of sex selection. But also, I think, we have to keep coming back, and I think this matters when we talk about viability and other arguments about so-called later abortions and everything, is if you keep coming back to saying it's her right to choose over what she does with her body, it actually doesn't matter what reason it is, whether she's had a one-night stand with somebody, she's gone off, or all sorts of reasons, which some people may say are bad decisions, but I think absolutely agree with the panel. You've got a right to make a wrong decision yourself, is that I think that we have to be careful that arguments that sound positive, even the Tories talk about empowering women by giving them more counselling. Well, they mean forced counselling, which is really being interrogated before you do something with your body. So I think that's a sign of our strength in a way, that they're trying to use what sometimes can sound like feminist or progressive arguments to attack us. But we need to be wary of them. And I think that I think it's great that the campaign that we can be proactively looking, both because I think next year, just to say, I think anniversary of the 67 Act this time around is both an opportunity to celebrate the achievement it really was, and it's brilliant to hear Diane talk about it, because clearly, it made a material difference to women's lives, but also to recognise, expose the weaknesses and the fact that how much more we got to fight for. I mean, it's incredible the Act was under attack from day one. And, my first marches were in '79 against the Curry Bill. And, I mean, they were magnificent to push back some of the antis for a long time, particularly an 80,000-strong demonstration co-organised with the TUC and stuff. And I think that sense of people maybe haven't had to do this so much, in the last 20 years. And I think now, this is really, I think that's why the anniversary is not just a time to sit around and go, oh, well, isn't it great we've got the 67 Abortion Act? Of course not. Look what we haven't got. But I think it is also an opportunity to really, hopefully, a new generation, which many of you are in the room, to take up this struggle, to actually fight for a proper extension and access to abortion that we can really be proud of.
You might be finding it easier to spot people than I am.
Hi, I'm a doctor, and as part of my typical working week, I work in an abortion clinic. And it was just to go back to this completely unregulated thing that people have brought up, and Anne's already brilliantly said it, but it's just to kind of second this. As healthcare professionals, we act within moral and legal codes of conduct. We have local and national guidelines. We're regulated internally and externally in pretty much everything we do. So all the campaign is calling for is to be taken out of the criminal statute, as it should be, and to be put back into the hands of women and healthcare professionals as well. But also I think this is a major issue, because I wrote to my MP, and the reply I got back I sent to someone in bpas, and it's this big concern about completely unregulated abortions, and it's very, it's misplaced, and I think that it's important to address this concern that people have, and this is from someone who claims to be an ardent supporter of women's rights as well, that we should have on the side of the campaign. So I just wanted to say it is an issue that we should address.
Somebody who hasn't spoken.
My name is Keith Hindle, and I'm only speaking because the gender imbalance among the speakers is quite shocking, and I'm just reasserting my sex's right to have a small voice in this matter. The most difficult part of this argument is the very late abortions. And so I'm asking in practical terms, how much political support have you got? How much legal support? How many doctors have you got? Have you got the BMA on your side and the RCOG on your side? Because that's what you'll need to get it through. This is a very tough proposition you're putting to the state and to Parliament. So you'll need a lot of hard lobbying and very practical lobbying, and you'll probably need to compromise too. So I ask those questions, but I just leave you with one other thought. If you're all steamed up, as I hope you are after this meeting, you should go to see Waste at the National Theatre, which was written in 1907, and it asserts, one of the chief characters asserts a woman's right not to have a child. It's a very good play. There are seats there. I was there only a week ago, and I don't get any royalties.
Yes, it's very hard for me to see. That's fine.
Hi. Oh, this is really weird talking in front of so many people. I just experienced this huge elephant in the room where I do wonder where's the role of fathers in all of this, because I don't believe that pregnancy and abortion is just the woman's issue. And if I feel that my partner doesn't have a single say in what's happening to our child, that seems somehow wrong. And I had this strange idea earlier that I will just share with you. So I thought, for example, if a woman does decide that she doesn't want to keep this child, could we maybe grant the father a right to the fetus to be put in a surrogate mom so that he wouldn't have to lose his child? It's just a thought that popped into my head earlier, so I just do wonder, what is your thoughts on the role of the father in all of this? Thanks.
Okay, that's great. We've got a cluster of questions for the panel. Sorry, did you want... Okay. We could start with that, and I don't know, Sam, whether you'd like to start on the question of men's rights in relation to abortion.
I think the only way to consider it really is to say, do you think you could have a man compelling a woman to go through with a pregnancy? Do you think you could assert a man's right to, over her wish, to terminate that pregnancy, that his right could trump hers in any way? And I think when you consider that, you have to conclude that it has to be her decision, because it's her body and it's her pregnancy, and it's her that's going to be carrying that child and giving birth to it if she decides to do so. So I just don't think at the end of the day you can possibly say it's for a man's right to impose his will on hers and to say we're going to carry on with this pregnancy regardless of your wish. On the point about the alliance building and what we're up against, I thought that was a very good point. It's partly why Fawcett's behind the campaign, because I want to support it, and I think it's really important we stand together. And I think you're right, it could well be there is compromises needed along the way, but who knows? But Millicent Fawcett had a great track record in compromise and negotiation, so I think, you know, in the spirit of that, that's why we're here as well.
Over the years, there have been 3 cases I know of where a man has gone to court to prevent a woman having an abortion. There were many television programs, broadcasts is one of the things producers like, but it always seemed to me to be very clear. Now, I'm sure there's more recent experience of what happens in BPAS, but in the years and years I was there, it seemed to me every time I met that situation, and certainly the 3 cases that went to court, the relationship between the man and the woman had already broken down. It was my experience of counselling that usually if the man would like to have the child and the woman was adamant she couldn't face it, he would say something along the lines, if this was left to me, I would decide we would have the child. But you are the person who's pregnant, you are the person who's going to give birth, and in the society we live in, you are the person who's going to take the brunt of the childcare. So sadly, reluctantly, I will go along with your view that the pregnancy should be terminated. In all the cases that did go to court and caused huge headlines, the relationship had broken, and it struck me, and the most famous of the court cases, the Peyton case, where I sat in the court in Liverpool and listened to it from beginning to end. It was a man who was bitter about the broken relationship and wished to exercise power over the woman. I'm sure that's not true in every case, but certainly in those 3 cases that were pursued as far as it was possible, that was certainly, it was a power struggle. It was not about the child. And if the relationship is already broken, surely it should be the woman who is going to be left having the child, and the man, having won his battle, could take himself off to Australia. You couldn't make a compulsory court order that he stayed and help care for or pay for the child. You cannot have a compromise. You cannot have half a baby, and you cannot have half an abortion. And the scales of natural justice, if there is that conflict, must come down on the side of the woman.
Goretti would like to comment on it because I know that she's very aware of what was happening, but there was a case in Ireland where a woman was not allowed to have an abortion, who was desperate to have one and who ticked all the boxes for the mental health criteria to have one, and they actually chose to give her a very early caesarean because they felt that delivering a baby at 26 weeks was the moral thing to do. And I don't know if you want to talk about that in relation to this, because I think this sense in which there can be any ownership of a baby until a baby is actually born is a tricky and difficult one.
I mean, in some ways that case showed up why the idea of sort of saying, well, I'm pregnant, I don't want this pregnancy, but you, the man, does want it. There's no way of taking the embryo or the fetus out of the woman and putting it into his body for his body to do the work, and that's part of the problem. But in this case, the Miss White case, she was very clear from when she discovered she was pregnant that she wanted an abortion. She'd gone on hunger strike. She'd tried to end the pregnancy in any way that she could, and in the end, as Elisa said, they actually they did a caesarean at 26 weeks because they were afraid that she'd kill herself, and that's actually sort of what it came down to. And of course, that has all kinds of implications because actually at 26 weeks, even for a baby born in a hospital at 26 weeks, there's a lot of chance of disability. There's a fair chance even that there'd be difficulties in surviving. And actually, the whole thing is just awful because the state went on then. She made it really clear she wanted nothing to do with this baby that had been forced on her. And yet the state went on to try to involve her in decisions about what was going to happen to him, whether he was going to be, fostered or adopted or whatever. And the whole thing was absolutely just, it extended her nightmare. It extended this nightmare for her. But actually, just to come back to the late term thing, I mean, to be honest with you, in Ireland, there's been so much discussion about all of this during the Protection of Life from Pregnancy Act that was passed in the south of Ireland to take account of the X case. And one of the things that even the most conservative parliamentarians had to say was, you can't have a time limit on when when there's going to be no abortions at all, because sometimes women's lives are in danger. Pregnancy can be quite a dangerous time for some women. And in that situation, they had to leave it that doctors would decide when a woman might or might not need, even in Ireland with all its restrictions.
So I raised that just because I think that the question of somehow giving ownership of a fetus to somebody other than the mother until the woman who's carrying it, until the time that it's born, is impossible and fraught with ethical problems. Naomi, did you have something that
I think just a kind of really quick kind of observation, really. We talk about kind of taking kind of abortion out of regulation, out of the criminal law and so on. But why don't you have a law that sets sort of time limits and so on? If you're out of that, actually you're putting at risk, particularly online, I think, you're saying that women actually then have no choice but to access unregulated, potentially unsafe, illegal abortions, and that is criminal, and that's completely wrong. And actually taking abortion out of the criminal law actually stops those unsafe procedures and actually protects women as well as protecting their choices.
There are a couple of other things that were more given, I think, in the spirit of advice, which I think the We Trust Women campaign will definitely take on, which is making it absolutely clear that there are really robust regulatory frameworks and that there's no intention whatsoever of losing those. I think that's good advice to understand that people don't all know that that's the case. And also good advice on making good partnerships with the Royal Colleges and all the professional organisations, which is something that I'm sure is on the agenda. Do you need to say anything more about that? No? Okay. Can we have a few more? We've probably got time for maybe 3 more, and then we're going to need to do a sort of wrap up. But can we see the guy next to the stripy shirt? Yes?
No, it's me. Sorry. Hi, my name is Morgan, and for quite a while I was an activist with Rosa. I don't know if many people know them. So they're most famous for doing their abortion pill and abortion pill bus and abortion pill train campaigns. So I was kind of curious if there is already that kind of direct action plan for this campaign, or if you see a kind of the more kind of flouting the law kind of activism having a part to play in the We Trust Women campaign, or if it's not really relevant in this kind of campaign. I'm just really interested.
And if you could pass it to,
Thank you. Thanks. Hello, my name is Sean, and I'm a medical student at UCL. I think part of the problem is that we perhaps aren't providing the best training that we could do for medical students at the moment who do want to go on, like me, to become abortion providers. So is part of this campaign going to be sorting out the sort of mess that we have and working with people like the RCOG and the BMA to make sure that actually medical students like me get the best training that we can get to provide abortions?
Sorry, could you pass it to Kelly from Abortion Rights to respond?
Thank you. Kelly Temple from Abortion Rights. Actually, Anne's point is very good, and I was just trying to find the notes as to where that thought came from, so I could be clear. You're right. It's not that the Abortion Act provided the guarantee to access. You're absolutely correct. So let's not falsely attribute that to the Abortion Act. Where my point was coming from was that in Canada, while abortion has been decriminalised, access is far more patchy than, for example, it is in the UK. And for many countries that have more liberal laws around first trimester abortion, they often don't have later abortion provision. And so it was more a question around how do we just make sure that when we're talking about decriminalising abortion, which is the right thing to do and removing it from that criminal legal framework, how do we also make sure that access at the same time is something which is as much as possible guaranteed, and what might be the best ways to do that, if that makes sense?
I might ask Anne to address whether the training issue is going to be part of the decriminalisation campaign, and also the question about guaranteeing access.
Oh, now, okay. I think the training of doctors and encouraging doctors to work in this really important field of healthcare has just got to be a huge priority for the Royal Colleges, for organisations like bpas, and for any campaigning that's going on. But I do feel that there's something that is key to this campaign, which extends beyond doctors' training. And it's simply that if we can move the law on, then we can enable people who are well qualified and want to provide abortion services, who are not necessarily doctors, to be able to step in and do that work. And the people that I'm particularly thinking of are midwives, and the people that I'm thinking of in particular are nurses, because one of the things that we're very aware of at the moment is that there is a shortage of doctors who want to work in abortion services, partly because it's a really stigmatised area. Point was made before that I've worked in infertility services and I've worked in abortion services, and the point that I often make is that, you know, all doctors think they're God, right? Doctors who work in infertility services know they are gods, you know, because they spend all their time bragging about the number of babies that they've helped into the world, whereas no one who works in abortion care brags about the number of women that they've helped to terminate pregnancies. It's seen entirely differently. There are a huge amount of nurses and midwives who want to work in this area, and I think that we really do have to tackle training. I honestly think that the whole issue of access is different to the law in exactly the way that, you know, you indicated, and that is that the criminalization of abortion in no way guarantees access, right? Access comes about when it's really seen as being a valued and essential part of healthcare. And that's something that we need to do. We need to get to medical students. We need to get to commissioners of services. We need to get to the organisers of those services and make sure that they are provided in a really comprehensive way. But again, the best way of doing that is to destigmatise it and to take away criminal sanctions on those people who want to work in it.
I think I understood the first question as being about whether direct actions were going to be part of this campaign. Was that the question? Yeah. I don't know if that's, again, something you briefly want to comment on, then we're all going to wrap up. So.
In terms of direct actions, I think that, we have to think about what kind of actions we can best make to bring this problem to people's attention. I think that at the moment, the big problem that we have, I think, is that people don't understand the law. They don't know the circumstances in which abortion can be provided. And I think a lot of young people think it is just available on request. They don't understand the restrictions on it. And I think the way that we can best do that is by looking at every single opportunity that we can find to ram the point home that things in this area really need to change. And I think that it's absolutely true that we also do need to get the Royal Colleges and so on board. I was really delighted that the Royal College of Midwives have joined this campaign, and in fact the Chief Executive was here in the audience earlier in the meeting but has had to leave. I think that Diane might make the point about how slow the Royal Colleges were to get on board with abortion law reform in the 1960s. And often they respond when there is real pressure. So for those of you who are medical students, I would be urging you to be getting onto your colleges and so on and looking at how you can incite them to go with the zeitgeist.
We've only got a few minutes left, and what I'd really like is to offer all the other panellists, from Naomi back to me, the opportunity to wrap up and any final thoughts and observations, if you have anything.
Yeah, I'm just really quickly just to say again, how pleased I am that this campaign has been launched, how important it is. And I think what Anne said just now is really important, actually, that lots of people don't understand the law as it is. And I think that when this campaign becomes really, really widely known and supported, I think people will be really shocked and really want to support it. So I would say, absolutely support this campaign. Do write to your MPs. Do speak to people about it. And it is incredibly important. We have to put women at the front and centre of our thoughts around this and around abortion. And when we get into discussions with people about things around viability or restrictions, actually think about real women and real women's choices and real women's lives, and actually what kind of society we want to live in, whether we do respect women and their human rights and their choices, or whether we don't.
Yes, I would agree that we have to let people know what the law is. Since I'd known I was going to speak at this meeting, I have mentioned this matter in all kinds of different circles, retired magistrates' lunch, and if anybody knows the law, they ought to, but they didn't. None of them, not one single person there, was aware of these restrictions. I've been to maybe 10 meetings of different kinds. I've raised it at every one along the conversational lines. Gosh, I'm going to be on the platform again, and I'm not sure if I'm up to it. And then raised the subject. The level of ignorance about the restrictions was horrendous. And the second thing, which I think we've not emphasised tonight, is how the technology has moved on and made it irrelevant. The abortion pill must be swallowed on registered premises because it has been decreed that the swallowing of the first pill is what brings the abortion about. Actually, as long as the woman swallows it there, she can go and abort on a bus, in a taxi, at home alone that night. That alone makes a complete nonsense of the law. And the pill will be used more and more. The fewer the restrictions, the earlier it can be used. And therefore, I think it's effective up to 9 weeks. So we want everybody to have that rather than the surgical procedure. And until there is an awareness, people who've grown up since abortion has been legal have no idea about these restrictions. And as I discovered from my retired magistrates, none of them have any idea. So I think we have to start with an education campaign about what the law says, what it requires, and how utterly nonsensical and unnecessary and expensive it is.
I don't think I can add much more to that. It was fantastic. I just think we've really got to remember where the law comes from. It comes from a Victorian patriarchal society, which we're still living with. So it's time to dispense with it. It's time to modernise the law and say that we trust women.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I just wanted to say something very brief about access, because actually, in my day job, as it were, I was talking to a doctor who works in Inverness, and she looks after women in the Highlands and Islands, including, the Outer Hebrides and those kind of places. And she was saying that she can use telemedicine to some extent to do some consultation with the women. But because of the Abortion Act, they have to come to Inverness to take that tablet. So, it's just ridiculous. And it just shows the way in which, the access thing isn't all one way. But I suppose I wanted to kind of really to finish up by saying that we talk in Northern Ireland, just like you do here, about the need to trust women to know what's good for them and for their families and maybe for the children they already have and for the lives that they want to lead. We also talk about walking in women's shoes and actually not sort of ever judging somebody unless you've actually had a chance to walk in their shoes and really know what their circumstances are. And if we don't do that, then what we're really saying is we know better than you what you should be doing in your life. And that's like the exact opposite of any kind of real autonomy. And in terms of the criminalisation, women in Northern Ireland are facing up to life imprisonment for taking abortion pills illegally. And in spite of that, they are continuing to do it. I was talking to Mara Clark from the Abortion Support Network earlier, and she was saying, do you think these prosecutions are going to stop women from using the pills? And I had to say, I'm sorry, there is absolutely no sign that that's the case. And Diane knows from going back to before the 1967 Act that it was the case that women were more than, were willing to take knitting needles to themselves. So of course they're going to take pills that are quite safe, even when prosecution is facing them. So the idea that abortion should be a criminal act when it's something so personal to a woman and that women are going to ignore it no matter what, and that's been proven time and time again everywhere across the world, then the idea that it should stay in the criminal law is an insult to every woman in this country.
I can't really top that, but I do think it's important to say that there is a real place for direct action at the moment because lots of stuff is happening in Scotland where the whole of the Abortion Act is being thrown open to debate. There's been a lot of anti-choice activism and there's a lot of opportunities for pro-choice organisations to get outside hospitals to support the people who are providing safe abortion for women and who want to continue to provide safe abortion for women. There are, as Goretti has said, there are 2 women who've been charged and prosecuted for taking abortion pills in Northern Ireland, and there will be lots of opportunities to provide solidarity, both in Northern Ireland, but also in London outside the Northern Ireland office and in wherever you are in the UK. And I think that kind of stuff is really important because we're not saying everything's fine and we want to make it better. We know that we're fighting on 2 fronts here. We want to be progressive and we want to make things better and to set in stone the principle of women's autonomy for the future and forevermore. But we're also defending at the same time and trying to make sure that Scotland gets the abortion access that the women in Scotland want and deserve at this point where it's sort of up for grabs. So there's lots of opportunities for direct action, and for everyone else in the room, if you're not a direct action kind of person, those conversations I think are the most important thing. I'd love a final round of applause for our panel, who I think have been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here.